Have you ever stopped to wonder what would actually happen if a superpower decided to take over an island without firing a single shot? Not with thousands of paratroopers falling from the sky or massive explosions on a beach, but just by parking their ships in a wide circle and waiting. The real answer might surprise you more than you'd expect. So let's dig into this together. When we talk about a potential war over Taiwan, we almost always picture a massive blockbuster movie. We imagine thousands of landing craft hitting the beaches, jets screaming overhead, and a desperate fight on the sand. But if you didn't already know, crossing 100 miles of open ocean into the teeth of modern anti-ship missiles is one of the deadliest things a military could ever attempt. It is basically a meat grinder. The planners on the other side know exactly how bloody that would be. They know they could lose half their fleet before anyone even steps foot on dry land. So they probably wouldn't do it. Instead, they would do something much quieter, much slower, and honestly, a lot more terrifying. They would simply turn off the ocean. Picture being a regular person waking up on a Tuesday morning in Taipei. The internet is still working. The lights are still on in your apartment. You go to make coffee, turn on the news, and there it is. A ring of heavily armed gray warships sitting 20 or 30 miles off the coast, completely surrounding the island. They aren't shooting at anyone. They aren't launching helicopters to invade the capital. They are just floating out there, perfectly still, politely asking every single civilian cargo ship to stop for a routine customs inspection. They broadcast to the world that they are just looking for illegal weapons to keep the region safe. Nothing to worry about. And just like that, an invisible clock starts ticking. Think about what that actually means for a second. This is an island of 23 million people. They don't have endless farmland, and they don't have massive oil reserves hidden underground. To keep the lights on, to keep the hospitals running, to keep the grocery stores stocked with fresh food, hundreds of massive cargo ships have to dock at their ports every single week. It is a continuous, invisible conveyor belt of survival. If those ships stop coming, the island starts to suffocate. It is a blockade in everything but name. The invading force might call it a quarantine. They might call it an extended safety drill. The name doesn't matter when the shelves go empty. We are conditioned to think of war as a noisy, fast thing. We expect an alarm, a sudden rush of violence, and a clear enemy to shoot back at. But this strategy breaks all the rules we are used to. What do you do when the enemy just sits out of range of your weapons, doing absolutely nothing but checking paperwork on container ships? A missile only destroys the specific building it hits. A blockade chokes the entire country at once. The captains of those giant civilian cargo ships aren't military heroes. They are just regular people making a living. When they see a line of foreign warships demanding to board them, they get incredibly nervous. Their insurance companies panic and cancel their coverage. So the cargo ships stop. They turn around. They drop their anchors a few hundred miles away and wait to see what happens. The conveyor belt stops moving. And suddenly, the United States Navy, sitting out there in the Pacific, realizes they have been handed a terrible puzzle. The ships they are supposed to protect aren't being blown out of the water. They are just being delayed. Which forces us to ask a question that no one wants to answer. Do you start the biggest war in human history over a delayed shipment of natural gas? When you look at a modern, wealthy place like Taipei, you see skyscrapers, bullet trains, and the incredibly advanced factories that build the microchips running our entire world. It looks invincible, but underneath all that, glass and steel is a terrifying mathematical reality. To keep a modern society running, you have to feed it both with calories for the people and energy for the grid. And Taiwan imports almost 98% of its energy. Every single drop of oil, every lump of coal, and every tank of natural gas comes across the water. Here's where the math gets brutal. You can stockpile coal and you can store oil in giant tanks underground. But natural gas is different. To ship it, you have to cool it down until it turns into a liquid, move it across the ocean in specialized ships, and then keep it cold until you need to burn it. Because it's so hard to store, Taiwan only keeps about 2 weeks worth of natural gas on hand at any given time. 2 weeks. And that gas powers roughly 40% of the island's electricity. 14 days from the moment those foreign warships drop anchor, the power plants start going quiet. Think about what happens when a modern electrical grid suddenly loses 40% of its capacity. It doesn't just mean dimming the lights. The government has to start making impossible choices on day one. Do you keep the hospitals running, or do you power the water treatment plants? Do you keep the internet servers up so the military can communicate? Or do you run the massive cooling systems inside the microchip factories to save the economy? You can't do all of them, so rolling blackouts begin. Without power, the heavy pumps in those towering apartment buildings stop working. Suddenly, millions of people don't have running water on the 20th floor. The machinery of normal life just grinds to a halt. And then there's the food. The island has a strong agricultural sector, but they still import a massive amount of what they eat, including almost all the grain used to feed their livestock. Just like in your hometown, the grocery stores rely on trucks arriving every single day to restock the shelves. When regular people see the news about the warships, what's the first thing they do? They panic buy. Every shelf in the country is emptied in 48 hours. The trucks can't bring more, because the cargo ships carrying the bulk supplies aren't docking anymore. This is the part of war that nobody makes movies about, because logistics is boring right up until it becomes deadly. Getting food, fuel, and supplies. Where they need to go is the only thing that keeps a country alive. The attacking force doesn't need to drop bombs on power plants or strike grocery stores with expensive missiles. They don't have to risk a single pilot to destroy the island's infrastructure. They don't need to destroy the island at all. They just need to unplug it. The math is inescapable, and the commanders on both sides of the water know it. Which means the pressure doesn't fall on the invading ships to attack. It falls on the defenders to figure out how to break the ring before the lights go out for good. Now, here's where the pivot happens, the moment where the rules of the game are completely rewritten. In every war movie we've ever seen, the conflict starts with a massive explosion. The bad guy fires the first shot, and the heroes spend the rest of the movie hitting back. But in this scenario, the first shot never comes. Instead of declaring an act of war, the invading force calls it a customs enforcement action. If you didn't already know, there's a huge legal and political difference between a military blockade and a quarantine. By calling it a quarantine, they're saying they aren't at war, they're just making sure no illegal materials are entering what they claim is their own territory. Think about what that actually means for the captain of a United States destroyer arriving on the scene. You're sitting on the bridge, looking at a foreign frigate through your binoculars. They aren't pointing their big guns at you. They aren't locking their combat radar on your ship. They've just pulled up alongside a massive merchant vessel, and a few sailors are climbing up a ladder to check the paperwork. If you fire a missile at that frigate to clear the path, you are the one who just started World War III. You're the aggressor. To the rest of the world watching on the news, you're the one who pulled the trigger first on a ship that was technically just doing its job. They aren't trying to sink the fleet. They're trying to make the fleet irrelevant. This is what military experts call gray zone tactics. It's called that because it's not quite peace, but it's not quite war. It's the messy, confusing area in between, where the usual rules don't apply. The goal isn't to destroy the enemy's equipment. The goal is to paralyze their brain. By moving these ships into place before anyone can react, they've created what's called a fait accompli. That's just a fancy way of saying they've already won the position, and now they're just waiting for you to decide if you're willing to die to try and take it back. Imagine if a neighbor parked their truck across the end of your driveway. They didn't hit your house, and they aren't shouting threats. They're just sitting there, leaning against the hood, eating a sandwich. To get to work, you have to be the one to go out there and physically shove them, or ram their truck with your car. Suddenly, you're the one who looks like the crazy person to the police. That's the exact trap they're setting for the world's most powerful navy. The genius of this move is that it uses the strengths of a democracy against itself. In a place like the United States, the president has to explain to the public why we're going to war. If the enemy is blowing up cities, that's an easy sell. But how do you explain to a family in Ohio or a student in California that we need to start a nuclear-capable conflict because a foreign navy is checking the manifest of a container ship? You can't. Not easily. And every hour, the leaders in Washington and Taipei spend arguing about legal definitions is another hour the island's fuel reserves drop. The clock isn't just ticking for the military, it's ticking for the politicians who have to decide who's going to be the bad guy in the history books. Every minute of hesitation makes the blockade feel more like the new normal. But while the politicians are debating in their air-conditioned offices, the sailors on those ships are staring at each other across the waves, and the tension is getting unbearable. Because while the plan is to win without fighting, all it takes is one nervous person with their finger on a button to turn a customs check into a massacre. Put yourself on the bridge of a United States Navy destroyer. You are the captain. You have spent your entire adult life training for combat. Your ship costs roughly $2 billion and carries dozens of missiles, each one capable of destroying a target hundreds of miles away with terrifying precision. You have enough firepower under your feet to level a small city. But right now, as you stare out the reinforced glass of the bridge, all that world-ending power is completely useless. Because the problem in front of you isn't something you can shoot. About 5 miles ahead of you is a massive, clumsy civilian ship. It is a tanker carrying liquefied natural gas, the exact kind of fuel the island desperately needs to keep its lights on. And cutting right across its path is a foreign guided missile frigate. The radio crackles. It's the civilian captain of the gas tanker, and his voice is shaking. He is telling you that the foreign frigate is ordering him to stop for a mandatory cargo inspection. If he doesn't stop, the frigate says it will physically block his path. The tanker captain is asking you, the United States Navy, what he should do. You have $1 billion of firepower under your feet, and it cannot help you answer the radio. If you didn't already know, the rules of engagement, the strict instructions telling a military commander when they are allowed to fight, are usually pretty clear. If someone shoots at you, or if they point a weapon and lock their targeting radar onto your ship, you are allowed to defend yourself. You shoot back. But the foreign frigate isn't doing any of that. Their guns are pointed straight up at the sky. Their radar is in normal search mode. They are just steering their ship into the same patch of ocean the tanker wants to use. Think about what that actually means for your career, your crew, and your country. If you tell the tanker to keep going, and those two massive steel hulls collide, you just caused an international incident. People could drown. The tanker could explode. And if you order your own destroyer to speed up and put yourself between the frigate and the tanker, you are playing a game of chicken with thousands of tons of metal. If you miscalculate and ram their military ship, you are the one who just committed an act of war. You pick up the phone to call your boss, the admiral in charge of the fleet. But the chain of command, the line of authority that goes from you to the admiral, all the way up to the president in Washington, is suddenly feeling incredibly slow. It is 3 a.m. in Washington. The politicians are scrambling into secure rooms, trying to figure out the legal definition of what is happening. They want to hold a press conference. They want to call the United Nations. But you don't have time for a press conference. The ships are moving at 20 miles an hour. You have less than 5 minutes before they hit each other. A single misunderstanding out here doesn't just sink a ship. It starts a war that ends the world. This is the crushing human weight of the gray zone. The politicians get to debate theory, but a 20-something sailor with their hand on a steering wheel has to deal with reality. Do you risk starting World War III to make sure a delivery of natural gas gets through? Or do you pick up the radio, swallow your pride, and tell the American tanker to turn around and go home? If you tell them to turn around, nobody dies today. But you have just handed control of the ocean to the other side. You have just proven that the blockade works. And while you watch that tanker slowly reverse course, you realize the real problem is the absolute mountain of military hardware waiting just over the horizon. Let us zoom out to the ocean just beyond the blockade. Picture a United States aircraft carrier strike group slowly circling in the deep water. If you didn't already know, a carrier group is the most concentrated, lethal piece of machinery human beings have ever created. Just the aircraft carrier itself costs roughly $13 billion. Add the escort destroyers, the attack submarines swimming below, and the 70 or 80 advanced fighter jets sitting on the flight deck. And you are looking at the wealth of an entire small nation floating on the water. It is designed to fight World War III. It is built to destroy entire enemy fleets and tear apart fortified military bases. But what happens when the enemy refuses to give you a military target? This is the math that keeps naval planners awake at night. The blockade rings surrounding the island wouldn't just be high-end, gray-painted warships. A massive portion of it would be the invading country's Coast Guard. These ships are massive, some of them even bigger than American Navy destroyers. But they don't carry long-range anti-ship missiles or advanced stealth technology. They carry heavy water cannons, reinforced steel hulls designed specifically for ramming, and maybe a small deck gun. They are painted white. To the international media, they look like law enforcement, not an invasion force. And compared to an aircraft carrier, they cost almost nothing to build. They built a wall out of cheap steel and dared the most expensive military in history to knock it down. Think about the ridiculous contrast happening here. You have an American F-35 stealth fighter flying overhead. That single airplane costs around $100 million, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars for every single hour it stays in the air. Its pilot has spent years learning how to drop precision weapons through the roof of a bunker from 30,000 feet. But how does an F-35 help a civilian cargo ship full of grain get past a Coast Guard cutter blocking the shipping lane? It can't. You cannot use a laser-guided bomb to politely clear a path. You either blow the white-painted ship into 1,000 pieces and officially start a global war, or you do nothing. There is no middle ground, and that is exactly the trap. We always assume that having the most advanced technology means you automatically win. We assume that stealth, speed, and precision are the ultimate trump cards in any standoff. But in this strange, messy area between peace and war, the winner isn't the one with the best weapons. The winner is the one who puts a cheap, heavy ship in the way and simply refuses to move. The $13 billion aircraft carrier is effectively paralyzed by a ship that costs less than the airplanes sitting on its own deck. The most powerful military in the world suddenly looks like a heavyweight boxer trying to fight a swarm of bees. You have all the knockout power in the world, but nothing you can safely punch. And while the admirals stare at their screens, paralyzed by this impossible math, the safety buffer for the 23 million people trapped inside the ring is quietly running out. Whenever a crisis like this gets imagined, people always ask the exact same question. Why can't we just fly over the ships? If you didn't already know, military planners hear this all the time. People point to history. They bring up the Berlin airlift from the Cold War, where thousands of planes flew over a Soviet blockade to keep a city alive. They think we can just repeat that. Fly the food in, drop the medical supplies from the sky, problem solved. It sounds incredibly simple, almost comforting, when you picture a massive transport plane touching down on a secure runway to save the day. But there is a very dark, very heavy reality about how modern civilization actually works. Airplanes are built for speed. Ships are built for weight. Think about what that actually means when 23 million people are waiting for the power to come back on. A single massive container ship, the kind that slowly pulls into the harbor every single day during normal times, can carry up to 20,000 metal shipping containers. Now look at the sky. A United States Air Force C-17 transport jet, one of the biggest military cargo planes on Earth, a massive gray beast that shakes the ground when it takes off, can carry roughly one standard shipping container's worth of truly heavy cargo. You would need thousands of massive military flights to replace the cargo of just one boat. Thousands of flights. That is the answer to a single delayed civilian ship. But it gets worse. Because we aren't just talking about boxes of bandages or freeze-dried food. We are talking about the basic energy required to keep a society from collapsing. You cannot fly liquid natural gas or millions of tons of coal in the back of a cargo plane. It is physically impossible. The volume is just too massive. And here is the detail that makes the logistical nightmare complete. To fly those massive cargo planes from a safe base in Japan or Guam all the way to the island, they have to burn an unbelievable amount of jet fuel. When they land, they need to fill up for the return trip. And where does the island get the aviation fuel needed to fill those planes back up so they can fly home? from the exact same civilian cargo ships that are currently dropping anchor 100 miles away, refusing to cross the blockade line. Every plane that lands becomes a massive, empty piece of metal sitting on a runway, slowly draining the island's final reserves of fuel just to leave. You cannot run a modern country out of a backpack. It is mathematically impossible to feed an island of that size, let alone power its water pumps and hospitals from the sky. Even if the United States dedicated every single transport plane it owned to the mission, completely ignoring every other military commitment around the entire globe, they couldn't even make a dent in the daily requirement. The invading force knows this perfectly well. They don't need to shoot the cargo planes down. They don't even need to point their radar at them. They just have to look at the math and wait. So the idea of a heroic air bridge is a complete fantasy. The rescue mission from the sky dies on a calculator before a single engine even turns on. The military commanders sitting in secure rooms in Washington and Tokyo are forced to look away from the sky and back down at the cold gray water. They are forced to admit that the only way to save the island is to physically push through the ring of ships. But as the days turn into a week, breaking that ring becomes less about naval strategy and more about a brutal, invisible countdown happening in the dark streets of the capital. So the massive planes can't save them, and the giant cargo ships are gone. What actually happens next? We always picture war as a loud, sudden explosion, but a blockade is a slow suffocation. It's a war of subtraction. Every single day, one more piece of normal life is quietly taken away from millions of people. Let's fast forward to day 15. The 2 weeks of liquid natural gas have burned away. The massive storage tanks are empty. The government has already been rationing power, but now the math simply breaks. The grid can't sustain itself. The rolling blackouts, where your neighborhood loses power for a few hours a day, turn into permanent darkness. An entire modern society goes quiet. Not from a bomb, but from a flipped switch. If you didn't already know, almost every piece of advanced technology relies on a few specific factories on this exact island. Those factories make the microchips that run your smartphone, your car, and the hospital equipment in your hometown. They require a staggering amount of electricity and completely pure water to operate. The moment the island's grid fails, those machines stop. The global supply chain of the 21st century freezes overnight. Every time you try to buy a new computer, a car, or even a refrigerator, you'd feel the economic shockwave of this invisible war. But the economic shock to the rest of the world is absolutely nothing compared to the human reality on the ground. Without power, the massive heavy pumps that push water up to the 10th or 20th floor of an apartment building stop working. In a dense, vertical city like Taipei, no running water means the sanitation system collapses in a matter of days. You can't flush toilets. You can't wash your hands. Regular people have to walk down 20 flights of dark, sweltering stairs just to stand in line at government water trucks carrying plastic jugs back up the steps. The food in the refrigerators rots. The hospitals are running on backup diesel generators, but diesel is just another fuel that has to come across the ocean. When the generator tanks run dry, the life support machines shut off. They're living in the 19th century, trapped inside the concrete shell of the 21st. And all the while, the invading fleet is still just sitting out there on the horizon, doing absolutely nothing violent. Their sailors are drinking hot coffee in air-conditioned mess halls. They're watching the lights go out on the island through their night vision goggles. They're perfectly safe. This is the brutal, terrifying genius of the strategy. If you drop bombs on a city, the people get angry. They unite, they fight back with everything they have. Because you've given them a clear enemy to hate. But a blockade doesn't create anger in the same way. It creates exhaustion. When your children are thirsty, when you can't flush your toilet, when the darkness stretches from days into weeks, you stop caring about global politics. You just want the water to turn back on. You just want the nightmare to end. The invading force isn't trying to defeat the island's military. They're trying to break the willpower of the everyday citizens, hoping the people will eventually march on their own government and beg them to surrender. And as the civilian population begins to buckle under the impossible strain, the pressure cooker in Washington reaches the absolute boiling point. forcing the American president to face a choice that could end human history. So now we find ourselves in the Oval Office, staring at the worst puzzle in modern history. The admirals are standing there, telling the president exactly how they can break the ring. They have the submarines in place, they have the stealth bombers fueled and ready. They tell the president they can clear a path through those white-painted Coast Guard ships in about 45 minutes. From a purely military standpoint, it isn't even a contest. The United States can absolutely shatter that blockade. But the president isn't looking at the tactical map. The president is looking at a completely different piece of paper, the one that outlines what happens 46 minutes from now. If the order is given, and American missiles tear those blockading ships apart, thousands of foreign sailors will die in the water. And the moment that happens, the government on the other side has to respond, or else their own people will overthrow them. So they fire their massive land-based missiles at the American aircraft carriers sitting out in the deep water. Now an American ship is sinking, and thousands of American sailors are drowning. So the United States has to strike the missile bases on the enemy mainland. And suddenly, two countries that both own hundreds of nuclear weapons are actively bombing each other's territory. All because someone wanted to deliver a shipment of natural gas. We spend so much time arguing about who would win a naval war in the Pacific. We compare the number of ships, the speed of the fighter jets, and the size of the defense budgets. We treat it like a massive game of chess, where the pieces are just made of metal. But that is the wrong question entirely. The real question, the one that actually freezes the president in that chair, is much simpler and a lot more human. Is an American parent willing to send their child to die over a customs inspection? Is a family in Los Angeles or Seattle willing to risk an escalated nuclear strike so that an island 10,000 miles away can keep its microchip factories running? We always ask who has the better missiles. We almost never ask who has the higher tolerance for pain. That is the terrifying brilliance of this strategy. It isn't designed to defeat the American military in a straight fight. It is designed to make fighting completely unthinkable. Deterrence, the idea that a stronger military keeps the peace just by existing, only works if everyone completely believes you are actually willing to use it. If there is even 1% of doubt that you will pull the trigger, the entire system collapses. By moving so slowly, by refusing to fire the first shot, by turning a violent military invasion into a boring legal argument over shipping lanes, the attacking force didn't just surround an island. They surrounded the very idea of American intervention. They found the single crack in the armor of a democracy. The fact that leaders have to answer to a public that doesn't want to end the world over a technicality. And as the hours tick by in that secure room in Washington, the silence itself becomes an answer. The hesitation becomes the surrender. Because while the politicians endlessly debate the legal definition of an act of war, the lights on the island stay off, the water stops running, and the government in Taipei realizes they are completely, utterly alone. The crushing truth finally hits them that the cavalry isn't coming, which leaves them with only one impossible choice to make. So what does the end actually look like? It doesn't happen with a massive treaty signing on the deck of a battleship, like the history books show us. When a blockade successfully chokes an island into submission, the end is incredibly quiet. It happens with a phone call on a secure line powered by the very last drops of backup generator fuel. The leaders in Taipei look at their dark cities, their empty water reservoirs, and their completely silent factories. They realize the United States isn't going to start a global nuclear exchange over a quarantine. So, they make the only choice they have left. They agree to what the invading force probably calls temporary administrative oversight, just to let the food and fuel shipments resume. They don't call it a surrender, and the other side doesn't call it a conquest. They call it a negotiated resolution to ensure regional stability. But the moment that paperwork is signed, the invisible wall drops. The white-painted Coast Guard ships move aside, and the massive civilian cargo ships finally start pulling into the harbor again. But when those ships dock, they aren't bringing independence. They are bringing terms and conditions. Think about what that actually means for the rest of the world the morning after the lights come back on. If you live in Japan, South Korea, or the Philippines, your entire national survival is built on a single promise. The promise that if someone tries to take your country, the United States military will show up and stop them. You have built your whole economy and your defense strategy around that one guarantee. But you just watched the most expensive, most advanced Navy in human history sit 100 miles away and do absolutely nothing, while 23 million people were slowly suffocated. They didn't lose a single ship, but they lost the entire ocean. Suddenly, every country on Earth has to recalculate its own survival. If the American umbrella of protection can be completely bypassed just by moving slowly and refusing to fire the first shot, then that umbrella is essentially useless. Countries that used to trust alliances might suddenly decide they need to build their own nuclear weapons, just so they never end up trapped in the dark. The unwritten global rules that kept the shipping lanes open and safe for 80 years simply evaporate. And every time you buy a phone, a car, or anything with a microchip, you will be paying a premium dictated by the new owners of the most important factories on Earth. If you didn't already know, military academies spend years teaching young officers how to win battles. They study how to outmaneuver the enemy, how to control the sky, and how to maintain their supply lines. But this strategy completely breaks all of those lessons. It forces us to accept that the ultimate military victory isn't destroying the enemy's army. The ultimate victory is designing a situation so incredibly complex and legally confusing that the enemy simply paralyzes themselves. The attacking force built a trap out of civilian cargo ships and legal definitions, and they dared the world to solve it with missiles. When the world blinked, the conflict was over. We spend trillions of dollars building the most advanced stealth fighters, the quietest attack submarines, and the smartest bombs ever conceived. We build machinery designed to survive the end of the world. But none of that technology matters if the other side creates a puzzle you are too afraid to solve. The biggest victory of the 21st century won't belong to the side that drops the most bombs, but to the side that realizes they don't need to drop any. This is a hypothetical scenario. Real outcomes would depend on factors no model can predict.